Hello and welcome. You stand at the threshold of a tale written in shadow and blood, a chronicle that spans millennia and touches the very fabric of divinity itself. This is the story of the dead three beings whose names echo through the annals of Faerûn's history with a resonance both terrible and fascinating. Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul. Perhaps you have heard these names whispered in temples, or seen their symbols carved into ancient ruins, or felt their influence ripple through events that shaped the world you know. But do you truly understand who they were, who they are, and what they represent? The dead three are more than simply fallen deities or dark gods relegated to footnotes in theological texts. They embody something fundamental about the nature of ambition, power, and the price of transcendence. Their story is a cautionary tale that begins not in the celestial spheres or outer planes, but in the mud and blood of mortal existence. Before they were gods, before they held dominion over tyranny, murder, and death itself, they were mortals. Mortals driven by an insatiable hunger that would never be satisfied, no matter how high they climbed. Let us journey back to a time before their ascension, to an era when three individuals walked Faerûn as flesh and blood, their divine destinies not yet written. In the ancient days of Faerûn, long before the time of troubles and the upheavals that would define modern history, three mortals met and forged an alliance born of mutual recognition. They saw in each other something that most mortals lack: a willingness to pursue power without restraint, without moral limitation, without the hesitation that keeps most souls bound to mediocrity. These three were Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul. Though the names they bore in those early days may have been different, lost to the countless centuries that have passed. Bane was a tyrant even in his mortal days. He understood that true power came not merely from strength of arms, but from the ability to dominate the wills of others. He saw the world as a hierarchy waiting to be conquered, with himself at its apex. Every interaction was an opportunity to assert dominance, every relationship a structure of control. He studied the arts of intimidation, subjugation, and oppression with the dedication that others might bring to more noble pursuits. Where some saw cooperation and community, Bane saw only the strong and the weak, the rulers and the ruled. His vision was one of eternal tyranny, where hatred and strife served as tools to maintain absolute control over all beneath him. Bhaal walked a darker path still. He was an assassin, a killer who had elevated murder to an art form. But his fascination with death went beyond mere professional expertise. Bhaal understood that in the moment of death, in that final transition from life to nothingness, there existed a kind of absolute power. To hold another's life in your hands and then extinguish it was to play at being a god. Each kill was not simply a contract fulfilled or an enemy eliminated. Each kill was a prayer to the concept of murder itself, an offering to the dark truth that all life ends in violence, one way or another. He saw himself not as a simple murderer, but as an agent of an inevitable cosmic principle. Myrkul, the third of this unholy trinity, was a necromancer of considerable skill and ambition. He delved into the mysteries of undeath, studying the boundary between life and death with an obsession that horrified even other practitioners of the dark arts. Myrkul saw death not as an ending, but as a transformation, a doorway to a different kind of existence. He animated corpses, bound spirits, and sought to understand the fundamental nature of mortality itself. His goal was nothing less than mastery over death, the ability to deny it or grant it as he saw fit. In his studies, he came to see the dead as a kingdom waiting to be ruled, an eternal domain that would outlast all the petty empires of the living. These three might have remained separate, each pursuing their own dark ambitions in isolation, but fate, or perhaps something more deliberate, brought them together. The exact circumstances of their first meeting are lost to history, obscured by the passage of ages, and perhaps deliberately concealed by the gods themselves. What we know is that they recognized in each other kindred spirits, individuals who shared not merely similar goals, but a similar fundamental nature. They forged an unholy pact, agreeing that they would dare to seek ultimate power or die in the attempt. Their alliance was never one of friendship or trust in any conventional sense. These were not companions who valued each other's company or who found comfort in mutual support. Rather, they formed a partnership of convenience, each understanding that together they could achieve what alone might remain forever out of reach. They were united by their shared hunger for power and their willingness to pay any price to obtain it. The pact they made was binding not through loyalty or affection, but through mutual recognition of what they could accomplish as a unified force. The three became adventurers after a fashion. They traveled across Faerûn, seeking out opportunities to increase their strength, their knowledge, and their influence. But their adventures were not the heroic quests of legend. They did not rescue the innocent or defend the weak. Instead, they carved a path of blood and terror across the land, leaving destruction in their wake. They toppled kingdoms, assassinated rulers, and raised armies of undead. They stole artifacts of immense power, slew monsters not to protect others, but to claim their territories, and made pacts with entities that most mortals would flee from in terror. Over the length and breadth of the realms, they strode, seeking powerful magic and spells, and defying death at every turn. No matter what monster they confronted or what spells they braved, the three mortals emerged unscathed at every turn. Their reputation grew with each success. Some called them the Dark Three, a name that reflected both their number and their nature. Others simply tried to stay out of their way, hoping that these three terrible individuals would pass by without notice. But the three were not content with mere mortal fame or earthly power. With each achievement, their ambitions grew. With each conquest, they hungered for more. Their greatest achievement in this mortal phase came when they managed to accomplish what few mortals ever could. Eventually, the trio destroyed one of the 7 lost gods, and they each seized a portion of his divine essence for themselves. This was no minor feat. The 7 lost gods were ancient entities whose names have been forgotten by history, but whose power was undeniable. To confront such a being and emerge victorious was a testament to the strength the 3 had accumulated to actually absorb a portion of divine essence into their mortal forms was unprecedented. The identity of this fallen deity has been lost to the passage of time, though some scholars suggest this victory may have been what first gave the 3 the audacity to believe they could claim full godhood. The divine essence they absorbed empowered their abilities beyond anything they had previously experienced. Bane found his ability to dominate and control others magnified. Bhaal discovered that his kills carried a weight they had never possessed before, as if each death resonated on a cosmic level. Myrkul's necromantic powers expanded, allowing him to raise and control undead of far greater power and number than before. But this taste of divinity only stoked the flames of their desire. Godhood still eluded them, and their mortal vessels became a prison, serving only to impede their divine destinies. The divine essence they absorbed empowered their abilities beyond anything they had previously experienced. Bane found his ability to dominate and control others magnified. Bhaal discovered that his kills carried a weight they had never possessed before, as if each death resonated on a cosmic level. Myrkul's necromantic powers expanded, allowing him to raise and control undead of far greater power and number than before. But this taste of divinity only stoked the flames of their desire. Godhood still eluded them, and their mortal vessels became a prison, serving only to impede their divine destinies. As the years passed and their power increased, the 3 found themselves facing a fundamental problem. No matter how much they accomplished, no matter how many they killed or subjugated or reanimated, it was never enough. The hunger that drove them could not be satisfied by mortal means. They had reached the pinnacle of what mortals could achieve, having even absorbed a fragment of divine power. And yet, they remained fundamentally mortal, subject to age, injury, and eventually death. This realization did not lead them to reflect on the futility of their pursuit or to seek contentment in what they had achieved. Instead, it crystallized their ultimate goal. If mortal power could not satisfy them, then they would transcend mortality itself. They would become gods, not quasi-divine beings or empowered mortals, but true deities with all the power and immortality that entailed. The decision was not made lightly, though neither was it made with any sense of doubt or moral consideration. They understood that the path to godhood was fraught with dangers that had destroyed countless others who had attempted it. They knew that the gods themselves actively worked to prevent mortals from joining their ranks, viewing such attempts as presumptuous at best and threatening at worst. But these obstacles did not deter them. If anything, they made the goal more appealing. After all, what achievement could be worthwhile if it came easily? The three began to research the nature of divinity itself more systematically than ever before. They sought out ancient texts, consulted with planar entities, and experimented with rituals that most would consider far too dangerous to attempt. They learned that gods drew their power from worship, from the belief and devotion of mortals, but they also learned that there were other paths to divinity, older and darker methods that did not require slowly building a religion over centuries. One such path involved claiming the divine essence of an existing god. If they could find a deity weakened or vulnerable, they might be able to challenge them, defeat them, and claim their power for themselves. This was no simple task. Gods were protected by their divine nature, able to manifest powers far beyond mortal comprehension. But the three had never let impossibility stop them before. They had already killed one of the 7 lost gods. Surely they could find another divine target and succeed again. The three needed to find the right target, a god powerful enough that claiming their essence would grant true divinity, yet vulnerable enough that 3 mortals, however powerful, might stand a chance of success. They could not simply march into the heavens and challenge one of the greater deities. That would be suicide. They needed to be cunning, to find weakness where others saw only strength. Their search led them to investigate the pantheon of death deities, for death was a domain that all 3 understood intimately. Bane knew death as the ultimate expression of tyranny, the final domination. Bhaal knew death as his art and profession. Myrkul knew death as the subject of his lifelong study. If they were to claim a divine portfolio, death seemed the natural choice. They learned of Jurgal, a deity whose name was known to scholars, but rarely spoken by common folk. Jurgal was ancient beyond reckoning, a god who had held dominion over death, murder, the dead, and strife long before most of the current pantheon had even existed. He was sometimes called the scribe of the doomed, or the lord of the end of everything. He kept records of every death, maintained the great archives of mortality, and ensured that souls went to their appointed afterlives. His domain was vast, encompassing everything that the 3 desired for themselves. But Jurgal was also, they discovered, weary. Eons of overseeing death had taken their toll on him. He had watched civilizations rise and fall countless times. He had recorded the deaths of billions upon billions of souls. The task had become mechanical, joyless, an eternal burden that he no longer wished to bear. He had grown detached and apathetic, caring little for the worship he received or the power he wielded. This information was exactly what the 3 had been searching for. A god of immense power, with a portfolio that suited their interests perfectly, who was weary of his role. It seemed almost too perfect. But they were not fools. They knew that even a weary god was still a god, and they would need to approach this carefully. The three spent additional years preparing for their confrontation with Jurgal. They gathered artifacts and weapons that could harm divine beings. They studied rituals that might strip a god of their power. They trained themselves to resist divine wrath and to strike at an entity whose very existence operated on a level beyond mortal comprehension. Each brought their own expertise to the preparation. Given the thorough preparation that characterized their mortal endeavors, we can reasonably assume they spent considerable time developing strategies to confront a deity. The specific rituals and methods they prepared remain largely unknown to us, lost to history, or deliberately kept secret by those who came after. What we do know is that they approached this confrontation with the same ruthless pragmatism that had defined their entire partnership. Bane focused on domination magic, on ways to assert his will over even a divine consciousness. He believed that if they could break Jurgal's will, force him to submit to their authority, they might claim his power through sheer force of personality. Bhaal prepared for assassination on a cosmic scale. He studied the vulnerabilities of divine beings, the rare and obscure methods by which a god might be truly killed rather than simply banished or weakened. He crafted weapons specifically designed to slay immortals and practiced techniques that could strike at the divine essence itself. Myrkul approached the problem from the perspective of his necromantic expertise. He researched ways to trap or bind a god's essence, to prevent them from simply reforming after death. He prepared rituals that could drain divine power and redirect it into mortal vessels, specifically the three of them. Together, they formed a plan of attack that combined all their strengths. They would journey into the Grey Waste, find Jurgal in his domain at the Castle of Bone, confront him with overwhelming force, and claim his divinity through whatever means proved necessary. They were prepared for a battle that might span days or even weeks, a cosmic struggle that would test every skill they had honed over their long partnership. They expected resistance. They expected a fight worthy of their abilities. They expected to earn their divinity through combat and conquest, as they had earned everything else in their lives. They did not expect Jurgal to simply give them what they sought, but that is a story for the next part of our journey together, when we shall explore what happened when three ambitious mortals confronted the Lord of the end of everything and discovered that sometimes the most unexpected outcome is the one that changes everything. Section 2. The Journey to Godhood and Jurgal's Gift. The journey to find Jurgal was unlike any the three had undertaken before. They were not simply traveling across the material plane of Faerûn, where dangers were known and predictable. To reach the Lord of the end of everything, they would need to venture beyond the boundaries of the mortal world, into the planes themselves. Specifically, they would need to find their way to the Grey Waste, one of the lower planes where Jurgal maintained his domain. This was not a place meant for mortals, even mortals as powerful as they had become. The Grey Waste was a plane of absolute neutrality in matters of morality. but it was also a place of crushing despair and hopelessness. Those who ventured there found their emotions slowly drained away, leaving behind only a hollow emptiness. Color faded from sight. Joy became a distant memory. Even the most passionate soul would find their fire reduced to cold ash after spending too long in that desolate realm. But the three were not concerned with such dangers. They had spent so long pursuing power that ordinary emotions had already become secondary to their ambitions. If anything, the gray waste was simply another obstacle to overcome. Finding the path to the gray waste required knowledge that few possessed. The three consulted with planar travelers, made pacts with entities that dwelled between worlds, and studied ancient texts that described the thin places where one plane touched another. Eventually, they found what they sought: a portal hidden in the depths of an ancient tomb that would transport them directly to the plane they needed to reach. They gathered their weapons, prepared their spells, and stepped through, leaving the mortal world behind. The gray waste greeted them with its characteristic bleakness. The sky, if it could be called such, was a uniform gray that seemed to press down from above. The ground beneath their feet was ash and dust, stretching in all directions without feature or landmark. There was no sun, no stars, no points of reference to guide travelers. In this place, one could wander for eternity and never find what they sought. But the three had not come unprepared. They had learned the location of Jurgel's stronghold, and they had the means to navigate even this featureless void. The castle of Bone rose from the gray landscape like a monument to death itself. It was not constructed from stone or wood, but from the bones of countless beings who had died across the eons. Skulls formed its walls, femurs and ribs its buttresses, vertebrae its towers. The entire structure was a reminder of Jurgel's domain, of the billions who had passed through death under his watch. To approach it was to feel the weight of mortality itself, to understand on a visceral level that all things end. The three walked toward the castle without hesitation. They had come too far and sacrificed too much to be deterred by atmosphere or symbolism. The gates of the castle stood open, as if they were expected. This should have been a warning, but the three were too focused on their goal to consider that perhaps their arrival was not the surprise they had imagined. They entered, walking through halls lined with more bones, past chambers filled with scrolls and books that recorded every death that had ever occurred. The silence was absolute, broken only by their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. At the heart of the castle, they found what they sought: a throne room, vast and cold, dominated by a throne constructed from bones more ancient than any they had seen before. And upon that throne sat Jurgel, the lord of the end of everything, the scribe of the doomed, the final scribe. He was a figure of absolute stillness, robed in gray that matched the plane itself. His face, if he had won beneath the shadows of his hood, was not visible. In one hand he held a quill, ever ready to record another name in his endless ledgers. In the other, he held nothing. For what need did death have for weapons? The three had prepared speeches, threats, demonstrations of power meant to intimidate and overwhelm. Bane stepped forward first, as was his nature, and claimed the throne for himself. His voice rang through the chamber, filled with all the authority and domination he had cultivated over his long mortal life. He declared that Jurgel's reign was over, that a new god of tyranny would take his place, and that resistance would be futile. It was a performance worthy of the tyrant Bane had always been, calculated to break the will of any who heard it. Bhaal followed with his own threat, darker and more personal. He promised to destroy Jurgel entirely, to murder a god and add his name to the infinite list of those who had died. He spoke of techniques and methods that could unmake even a divine being, of knowledge he had gathered specifically for this purpose. His words were a blade pressed against the throat of existence itself, a reminder that even gods could bleed. Myrkul completed the trio with his own pronouncement. He threatened to imprison Jurgel's essence, to trap the god of death in a phylactery or artifact from which he could never escape. He would bind Jurgel's power, drain it slowly over eons, and use it to fuel his own ascension. It was a necromancer's threat, speaking to his mastery over the boundary between life and death, between freedom and eternal imprisonment. The three stood before the throne, waiting for Jurgel's response. They expected resistance. They expected a battle. They expected to prove themselves worthy of godhood through conflict and conquest, as they had proven themselves worthy of everything else they had achieved. What they did not expect was for Jurgel to laugh. It was not a laugh of mockery or madness. It was the laugh of someone who has finally heard a joke they have been waiting centuries to hear. The laugh of relief and recognition. Jurgel rose from his throne, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of eons, but also something the three had not anticipated. Weariness. Deep, profound weariness that came from watching the same cycle repeat endlessly, from recording the same types of deaths over and over, from bearing a responsibility that had long since lost any meaning. He told them that he had grown tired of his duty for longer than they could comprehend. He had overseen death in all its forms. He had recorded every murder, every natural death, every accident and sacrifice. He had guided souls to their afterlives, maintained the balance between life and death, and presided over the kingdom of the dead. And through it all, he had found no joy, no satisfaction, no purpose beyond the mechanical repetition of his duties. He was done. He wanted to be done. And in these three ambitious mortals, he saw an opportunity. He would give them what they sought. He would surrender his divine power willingly. But his domain was vast, encompassing death, murder, the dead, and strife. It was too much for any single being to hold, even a being as powerful as any of the three. So he proposed a division. They would split his portfolio among themselves, each taking a portion of his power and responsibility. But who would receive which portion? Jurgel's solution was as simple as it was strange. They would play a game, not a game of combat or magical prowess, not a test of their abilities or worthiness. A simple game of chance, of skill, of the type that mortals had played since time immemorial. The accounts differ on the exact nature of the game. Some say it was knucklebones, dice made from the finger bones of the dead. Others say it was skull bowling, rolling skulls at targets made from more bones. The exact game matters less than what it represented. After all their preparation, after all their threats and demonstrations of power, their destinies would be decided by something as mundane as a game. But perhaps that was Jurgel's final joke, his last act as the god of death, to remind these ambitious mortals that for all their power, for all their achievements, chance still played a role in their fates. Or perhaps he simply did not care enough to make the division himself, content to let randomness decide what millennia of divine oversight could not. The three agreed, because what choice did they have? They had come seeking godhood, and it was being offered to them freely. The manner of its distribution was irrelevant compared to the goal itself, and so they played, these three mortals who had killed one of the 7 lost gods, who had carved a path of blood and terror across Faerûn, who had prepared for cosmic battle. They played a simple game while the god of death watched. Bane won. Perhaps his competitive nature gave him an edge, or perhaps simple chance favored him in that moment. As the victor, he was given first choice of Jurgel's portfolios. He chose strife, the domain of conflict and hatred, of discord and struggle. It suited him perfectly, this portfolio that would allow him to spread tyranny and domination across all of Faerûn. With strife under his control, every conflict would feed his power. Every act of oppression would strengthen his divine essence. Myrkul came in second. He was given his choice of what remained. He chose the dead, the domain of the afterlife, and those who had passed beyond mortal existence. This too was perfect for him. The necromancer who had spent his mortal life studying the boundary between life and death. Now he would rule over all those who had crossed that boundary, lord of an eternal kingdom that grew with every passing moment. That left Bhaal with death itself, specifically murder. He would be the god of death by violence, of lives ended by the hands of others. Every assassination, every murder, every kill would be his to claim. For the assassin who had made killing his art, who had seen murder as a form of worship even before his ascension, this was the ultimate validation. He would be murder incarnate, the divine embodiment of violent death. Jurgel watched as the three absorbed their new portfolios, as divine power flooded into mortal vessels and transformed them from ambitious humans into gods. The transformation was not instantaneous or simple. Their bodies changed, adapting to contain the immense power now residing within them. Their consciousnesses expanded, suddenly aware of every death, every act of strife, every soul entering the realm of the dead. They could feel worship, faint at first but growing, as those who had feared or revered death now found their prayers answered by new deities. The pain of transformation was immense, but so was the pleasure. They were becoming what they had always known they were meant to be. No longer bound by mortal limitations, no longer subject to age or disease or death. They were eternal now, immortal, divine. They had achieved what they set out to achieve. They had become gods. And Jurgil stepped down from his throne with what might have been a smile beneath his shadowed hood. He was free, free from the burden of death, free from the endless recording and sorting of souls, free from a responsibility he had carried for so long it had become meaningless. He retained some divine power, enough to maintain his existence and his archives, but the weight of death itself now rested on other shoulders. He became something less than he had been, voluntarily reducing himself from a greater deity to a servant of those he had created. But to him, it was not a reduction, it was liberation. The three newly ascended gods stood in the castle of bone, feeling the extent of their new domains, understanding for the first time what it truly meant to be divine. They were no longer Bane the tyrant, Bhaal the assassin, and Myrkul the necromancer. They were Bane, god of tyranny and strife, Bhaal, god of murder, Myrkul, lord of the dead three, as they would come to be known, though at that moment they had no way of knowing how prophetic that name would become. They departed the gray waste separately, each returning to Faerûn to establish their worship and claim their rightful place among the pantheon. The alliance that had brought them to godhood began to fray almost immediately. As mortals, they had been united by common purpose and mutual benefit. As gods, they found themselves competing for worship, for influence, for power beyond what they had already claimed. Their domains overlapped in places, creating friction and conflict. But that, too, is a story for another time. For now, we should consider what had just occurred. Three mortals had achieved godhood not through the slow accumulation of worshippers over centuries, not through some cosmic catastrophe that elevated them by chance, but through a deliberate choice to pursue divinity and the unexpected willingness of a god to surrender his power. They had threatened, prepared, and postured, ready for war. Instead, they found a weary deity who simply wanted rest. It was not the heroic story they might have imagined. There was no epic battle, no triumphant victory against impossible odds, just a game of chance and a transfer of power. But the result was the same. They were gods now, with all the power and responsibility that entailed. Faerûn would never be the same. The mortal world now had three new deities, each focused on domains that brought suffering and death, each lacking the tempering influence of mortal experience and empathy that sometimes guided older gods. The ramifications would echo through the ages, shaping events and lives across the entirety of the realms. Wars would be fought in their names. Temples would be built to house their worship. Countless souls would pray to them, sometimes out of devotion, but more often out of fear. The dead three had arrived, and the divine order of Faerûn had been forever altered by three ambitious mortals who refused to accept the limitations of their existence. Section 3. The Golden Age of the Dead Three. The three newly ascended gods returned to Faerûn as transformed beings, no longer bound by the limitations that had defined their mortal existence. Each carried within them a portion of what Myrkul had relinquished, divine power that pulsed through their transformed essences like lightning through storm clouds. They were immortal now, eternal, capable of perceiving reality in ways that mortals could never comprehend. Every prayer spoken in fear became sustenance for them. Every act that fell within their domains strengthened their divine presence. They had transcended mortality, and Faerûn would feel the weight of that transformation for centuries to come. Bane established himself as the god of tyranny, strife, and hatred. His domain encompassed every act of oppression, every moment of conflict between peoples, every surge of hatred that drove one being against another. Where there was tyranny, there was Bane. Where there was discord and division, there was Bane. Where hatred festered in hearts and turned neighbors into enemies, there was Bane. His portfolio was vast and terrible, touching nearly every negative aspect of civilization and society. Wars fought for conquest, rather than defense, fell under his purview. Tyrants who ruled through fear and brutality were his instruments. Every slave driver, every cruel overseer, every despot who ground the weak beneath their heel was, knowingly or not, serving the will of Bane. He established his divine realm on Acheron, a plane of eternal conflict where armies clashed endlessly across iron cubes floating in the void. It was a fitting home for a god of tyranny and strife, a place where war never ended and domination was the only law. From this stronghold, Bane watched over his domain and plotted the expansion of his influence. He sought nothing less than total control, not merely over mortals, but over other deities as well. His ambition had not been tempered by achieving godhood. If anything, it had grown larger, now operating on a cosmic scale rather than a mortal one. The worship of Bane spread quickly across Faerûn, though often through fear rather than devotion. His temples were fortresses, places of iron discipline where the weak were crushed and the strong rose through brutality and cunning. His clergy were tyrants in their own right, establishing hierarchies of domination wherever they went. They preached that strength was the only virtue, that mercy was weakness, and that the natural order of the universe placed some beings above others. Those at the top had the right to rule absolutely, and those below had only one purpose: to serve and obey. His priests wore black and purple, colors of shadow and bruised flesh, and carried gauntlets as their holy symbol. The Black Hand, it was called, representing the iron grip of tyranny that Bane wished to close around all of Faerûn. They conducted rituals that involved domination and subjugation, ceremonies where the weak were forced to kneel before the strong, where oaths of servitude were extracted through fear and pain. To worship Bane was to accept that power justified itself, that the strong had no obligation to the weak except to use them as tools for greater conquest. But Bane's influence extended beyond his temples. Every tyrant king who ruled through terror, every warlord who conquered for the sake of domination, every slaver who traded in human misery. All of these served Bane, whether they knew his name or not. His power grew with every act of oppression, with every conflict that divided peoples, with every spark of hatred that ignited into violence. In the centuries following his ascension, Bane became one of the most powerful evil deities in the Faerûnian pantheon, feared and respected even by those who opposed him. Myrkul claimed dominion over death and the dead, establishing himself as the god who presided over the realm where all mortals eventually journeyed. His portfolio included not just death itself, but everything associated with the end of life, wasting diseases that slowly drained vitality, old age that weakened the body and dimmed the mind, exhaustion that pushed living beings toward their final rest. All of these fell under Myrkul's watch. He also claimed dusk, that liminal time between day and night when the world held its breath and prepared for darkness. It was a fitting domain for a god of death, that twilight moment that mirrored the transition between life and the afterlife. Historical records suggest that Myrkul expanded his domain beyond what he initially received from Jurgal. Some theological texts indicate he claimed portfolios over decay, parasites, and corruption. Though the exact timing and mechanism of these acquisitions remain subjects of scholarly debate among historians of the divine, there are also references in ancient texts to his association with autumn, connecting the dying season to his broader authority over death and endings. Whether he claimed this from Selûne, or whether it was simply a natural extension of his death portfolio, is unclear. But by the height of his power, Myrkul's faithful observed autumn as a season sacred to their lord. Every fallen leaf, every harvest gathered before the killing frost, every preparation for winter's death became a small tribute to the Lord of Bones. Myrkul established his realm in the Grey Waste, the same plain where Jurgal had once held court. He ruled from the City of Strife, also known as the Bone Castle, where the dead came to be judged and sorted before continuing to their final destinations. Unlike Jurgal, who had grown weary of this task, Myrkul embraced it with the enthusiasm of one who had spent his mortal life studying death, and now had eternity to explore its mysteries. He was sometimes called Old Lord Skull, the Reaper, and the Lord of Bones, names that reflected his skeletal imagery and association with death's physical remnants. His worship was widespread, but often practiced in secret or in the silence of graveyards and tombs. Necromancers revered him as the source of their power, the divine patron who granted them mastery over undead, and the ability to transgress the boundary between life and death. Undertakers and grave diggers prayed to him for protection in their work. those dying of wasting diseases sometimes appealed to him for a quick end rather than prolonged suffering. His clergy wore gray and silver, the colors of ash and bone, and conducted their rituals in crypts and mausoleums where the presence of death was palpable. Myrkul's priests taught that death was not an ending, but a transformation, a shedding of mortal flesh to achieve a purer existence. They encouraged the study of undeath, viewing intelligent undead like liches as beings who had achieved a kind of perfection, freed from the weaknesses of living flesh while retaining their consciousness and power. This philosophy made Myrkul's faith particularly attractive to those who feared death, but were willing to embrace dark magic to avoid it. His temples became repositories of necromantic knowledge, places where forbidden rituals were preserved and practiced openly under divine sanction. The realm of the dead itself expanded under Myrkul's rule, where Jurgal had maintained it as a vast bureaucracy, a place of records and orderly transition. Myrkul transformed it into something darker and more oppressive. The dead who passed through his domain often found themselves subjected to trials and torments, especially those who had defied death in life or who had failed to show proper respect for the dead. Myrkul was not a merciful god, and his realm reflected the cold finality of death itself. Bhaal received what might have seemed the smallest portion of Jurgal's domain, death through murder, but in his hands, this portfolio became something profound and terrible. Bhaal was not simply the god of death. He was the god of murder specifically, of death inflicted by one being upon another with intent and malice. Every assassination, every killing, every act of violence that ended a life fell under his divine awareness. He experienced each murder as it happened across Faerûn, feeling the moment when life transitioned to death through violent means. For the assassin who had made killing his art in mortal life, this was the ultimate validation of his chosen path. The portfolio of murder, as it turned out, was added to his divine authority in later theological texts. Initially, he held simply death, but as his worship evolved and his priests refined their understanding of his domain, murder became his primary focus. This was death with purpose, death as a tool or an art form, death inflicted deliberately rather than arriving through natural means. Where Myrkul oversaw the transition itself and the realm beyond, Bhaal claimed the moment of violent death, that instant when one consciousness extinguished another. Some scholars noted that Bhaal chose the portfolio of death strategically. He could kill Bane's minions, disrupting the tyrannical hierarchies his fellow god sought to establish. He could starve Myrkul of power by preventing deaths from occurring, or flood his realm with souls by encouraging murder on a massive scale. The three gods had divided Jurgal's portfolio among themselves, but their domains overlapped in ways that created both cooperation and conflict. Death, tyranny, and the realm of the dead were interconnected, and the three gods found themselves locked in a complex relationship that combined alliance and rivalry in equal measure. Bhaal established his divine realm in Gehenna, on the layer called Chamada, in a place known as the Throne of Blood. It was a fitting location for a god of murder, a realm of volcanic mountains and rivers of lava, where violence was the natural state of existence. From this throne, Bhaal watched every murder committed across Faerûn and beyond. He felt each killing, savored each moment of violent death, and drew power from the endless stream of murders that plagued civilization. His worship was necessarily secretive, practiced by assassins' guilds, serial killers, and those who dealt in death for profit or pleasure. His temples were hidden, often underground or disguised as innocent buildings, because openly worshiping the god of murder would invite immediate persecution from authorities. His clergy moved in shadows, marking their targets and conducting ritual killings that served as worship. They taught that murder was the purest form of worship, that each killing was a prayer offered directly to their god. The faithful of Bhaal believed that all beings were potential sacrifices to their lord, that murder was not merely acceptable, but sacred. They developed elaborate rituals around killing, turning assassination into a holy act complete with prayers, ceremonies, and specific methods of death. Some specialized in particular types of murder, poison or blade or strangulation, elevating their chosen method to an art form. Others sought to increase the body count, believing that quantity itself was a form of devotion. The most devoted of Bhaal's followers dreamed of orchestrating massacres, of finding ways to kill hundreds or thousands at once as the ultimate offering to their god. Bhaal's priests wore dark red and black, the colors of dried blood and shadows, and used the symbol of a skull surrounded by blood drops. They promised their gods favor to those who killed in his name, and threatened his wrath upon those who prevented murders or who brought killers to justice. In their theology, murder was the natural state of the world, the inevitable end that awaited all living beings. To kill was to fulfill a cosmic purpose, to serve as an agent of the god of murder in his eternal work. The three gods, now established with their individual domains and worshippers, found their relationship as deities very different from their alliance as mortals. As mortals, they had been united by common purpose and the understanding that cooperation served their mutual interests. As gods, they discovered that their domains created friction as often as synergy. Bane sought to dominate and control, which sometimes required keeping his subjects alive and productive. Bhaal sought to kill, which often disrupted the hierarchies Bane tried to establish. Myrkul claimed the dead after they died, benefiting from both Bane's wars and Bhaal's murders. But this made him dependent on his fellows in ways that chafed against his desire for independence. They engaged in what might be called divine politics, forming alliances and betraying them as circumstances demanded. Sometimes they worked together, combining their powers to achieve goals that none could accomplish alone. Other times they worked at cross purposes, each pursuing their own agenda without regard for how it affected the others. They were not friends, had never been friends even as mortals, and divinity had not softened the sharp edges of their personalities or ambitions based on the evidence of their later conflicts and the nature of their individual domains. Scholars have inferred that their relationship as gods was marked by tension as often as cooperation. Direct historical evidence of their divine interactions during this period is limited, filtered as it is through the accounts of their mortal followers and the rare mentions in other deities' records. What we can determine from the patterns of their worship and the conflicts between their faithful suggests a complex dynamic that combined alliance with rivalry. Their conflicts with other deities were frequent and sometimes spectacular. Tyr, the god of justice, opposed all three on principle, seeing them as embodiments of everything law and justice stood against. Ilmater, the god of suffering, worked to ease the pain they caused, offering comfort to the victims of tyranny, murder, and death. Lathander, god of renewal and birth, stood in direct opposition to Myrkul's domain of death and decay. Kelimver, who would later claim a portion of the death domain, had not yet ascended, but the seeds of future conflict were already planted in the cosmic order. The Dead Three, as they had become known, carved out a substantial portion of the evil pantheon's influence. They were not the only evil gods, certainly not the most powerful individually when compared to ancient deities like Shar or Set. But together, they represented a formidable force. Their combined domains touched so many aspects of mortal life that avoiding their influence entirely was nearly impossible. Every society had tyrants. Every civilization dealt with murder. Every culture faced the reality of death. In this universality lay their power. For centuries, they ruled their domains and expanded their influence. Temples rose in their names, often hidden or disguised, but proliferating nonetheless. Cults formed around their worship, some large and organized, others small and isolated. Wars were fought that fed all three simultaneously, with Bane's tyranny driving the conflict, Bhaal's murder claiming countless lives, and Myrkul's realm swelling with new arrivals. They had achieved what they set out to achieve as mortals. They were gods, powerful and feared, their names spoken across Faerûn with dread and reluctant respect. But immortality does not mean immunity to change, and power does not guarantee security. The ambitions that drove them to godhood did not cease simply because they had achieved divinity. If anything, those ambitions grew larger, more cosmic in scope. Bane wanted to dominate not just mortals, but other gods. Myrkul sought to expand his realm of death to encompass more than Jurgil had ever controlled. Bhaal dreamed of a world where murder was not just common, but universal, where death by violence became the only form of death that existed. These expanding ambitions would eventually lead them to make choices that would shatter everything they had built, that would cost them their divinity and earn them the name Dead Three, in a far more literal sense than anyone could have imagined. But that catastrophe lay in the future, still decades away from the height of their power. For now, they reigned as gods, secure in their immortality and confident in their dominance. The golden age of the Dead Three stretched across centuries, a dark era when tyranny, murder, and death held sway over large portions of Faerûn, when their priests walked openly in some cities and schemed in shadows in others, when their divine power seemed unassailable. It would not last. Nothing truly lasts, not even the reign of gods. But for a time, the three mortals who had dared to claim divinity enjoyed the fruits of their ambition, ruling over domains that brought suffering to millions and would continue to echo through Faerûn's history long after they themselves had fallen. Section 4. The Time of Troubles and Catastrophic Fall. The year 1358 Dale Reckoning began like any other in Faerûn's long history, with mortals going about their lives largely unaware of the cosmic forces that shaped their world. But before that year ended, the entire divine order would be shattered. Gods would walk the earth as mortals, and the Dead Three would face their ultimate downfall. This period would become known as the Time of Troubles, the Avatar Crisis, the Gods' War, and by many other names. But whatever term was used, it represented one of the most catastrophic events in Faerûnian history. The crisis began not with the Dead Three, but with the actions of other deities, whose ambitions proved even more reckless than those of Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul. The crisis began when the tablets of fate were stolen from Io, the overgod who stood above all other deities. Historical accounts suggest that Bane and Myrkul were involved in or implicated in this theft, though the exact details of who stole the tablets and their specific roles remain somewhat obscured in the theological records. The tablets of fate were artifacts of immense cosmic significance, containing the fundamental laws that governed the relationship between gods and mortals, defining the balance of power in the multiverse itself. To steal them was to challenge the very structure of reality. Io, the overgod, was not a god who involved himself in the petty squabbles of lesser deities. He existed on a level above the concerns of individual pantheons, maintaining the cosmic order and ensuring that the multiverse functioned according to its fundamental principles. But the theft of the tablets of fate was not a petty squabble. It was a direct challenge to his authority, an attempt to rewrite the rules that he had established. His response was swift and absolute. If the gods thought themselves above the rules, if they believed their divine status exempted them from consequences, then he would remind them of their true nature. Io decreed that all gods would be cast down from their divine realms and forced to walk Faerûn in mortal form until the tablets of fate were recovered. This was not a temporary inconvenience or a minor punishment. The gods were stripped of most of their divine power, reduced to avatars that, while stronger than ordinary mortals, were vulnerable in ways they had not been for millennia. They could be injured, they could be killed, And if they died in mortal form, their death would be permanent, their divine essence scattered or absorbed by others. The effect on Faerûn was immediate and catastrophic. Magic became unpredictable as the weave, the fabric of magical energy that covered the world, fluctuated wildly without the gods to maintain it. Spells that should have worked failed spectacularly. Spells that should have been impossible suddenly became reality. Priests found their connection to their deities disrupted, their prayers answered erratically or not at all. The divine order that had provided structure and meaning to millions of lives suddenly became unreliable. For the dead three, who had spent centuries secure in their divinity, the fall to mortal form was a shock beyond comprehension. One moment they were gods, able to perceive reality across vast distances, to manifest their will through divine power, to exist in a state beyond mortal understanding. The next moment, they were confined to physical forms, limited by mortal senses, vulnerable to weapons and magic. And all the dangers they had transcended when they first achieved godhood. It was a reversal of their greatest triumph, a return to the state they had worked so hard to escape. Bane found himself in the city of Gentle Keep, one of his greatest strongholds on Faerûn. The city was controlled by the Gentarim, an organization of wizards, warriors, and rogues who served his interests and spread tyranny across the region. If any place could be considered safe for the fallen god of tyranny, it was here among his most devoted followers. But safety proved illusory. Bane's ambitions had not diminished with his reduction to mortal form, and he immediately began scheming to recover the tablets of fate and restore himself to full divinity. His plans brought him into conflict with Torm, the god of duty and loyalty, who had also been cast down to mortal form. Torm was everything Bane was not: honorable, selfless, dedicated to protecting the innocent rather than dominating them. The two gods had opposed each other for centuries from their divine realms, but now they would face each other directly, god against god, in mortal combat. The confrontation took place in the streets of Tantras, a city sacred to Torm, and it was as spectacular as it was terrible. The battle between Bane and Torm was not a simple duel. It was a clash of divine essences, of fundamental cosmic principles given physical form and set against each other. Buildings crumbled under the force of their conflict. The earth itself shook. Mortals caught in the crossfire were crushed or incinerated, or driven mad by proximity to power they were never meant to witness. Historical records from Tantras confirm that both gods fell in this confrontation. Bane, the god of tyranny who had schemed and dominated for centuries, was destroyed by the very duty and loyalty he had always scorned. Torm, faithful to the end, had given his life to ensure that tyranny would not triumph. The death of a god is not like the death of a mortal. When a mortal dies, their body remains, slowly decaying until it returns to the earth. When a god dies, their divine essence must go somewhere, must be absorbed or dispersed, or claimed by another. Bane's essence was not lost entirely, but neither did it remain coherent. His son, Iatu Exvim, would later claim a portion of it, becoming a lesser deity in his own right. But the Bane who had ascended to godhood alongside Bhaal and Myrkul was gone, truly dead in a way he had never imagined possible when he achieved immortality. Myrkul's fate was equally dramatic, but took a different path. The Lord of Bones, the god of death and the dead, found himself confronted by the mortal hero Midnight, who would later become the goddess Mystra, deity of magic. Myrkul had invested much of his divine essence in an artifact called the Crown of Horns, a powerful item that served as both a repository of his power and a symbol of his authority over death. He believed this would protect him, that by distributing his essence, he could survive even the death of his avatar form. But Midnight, empowered by one of the tablets of fate and wielding magic on a scale few mortals had ever achieved, proved more than a match for the weakened god. The confrontation occurred in the city of Waterdeep, one of Faerûn's greatest metropolises, and like Bane's death, it was witnessed by thousands who would carry the memory of that day for the rest of their lives. Myrkul manifested as a massive skeletal figure, a physical embodiment of death itself, towering over the city and threatening to drag all within into his realm of the dead. Midnight struck at him with magic channeled through the tablet of fate itself, power that bypassed his divine protections and shattered his physical form. Myrkul's avatar was destroyed, his essence scattered across the plains, his grip on the realm of the dead broken. Like Bane, he had died truly and permanently, his consciousness dispersed beyond any hope of natural recovery. The Crown of Horns remained, carrying a fragment of his power, but the god himself was gone. Bhaal's end was perhaps the most fitting for the Lord of Murder. He had spent his divine existence presiding over violent death, experiencing each murder committed across Faerûn, savoring the moment when life ended through deliberate violence. Now, he would experience that same fate from the other side. The circumstances of his death are recorded in histories, both mortal and divine. A tale of hubris meeting its inevitable conclusion. Bhaal, like his fellow members of the Dead Three, sought the tablets of fate during the time of troubles. He believed that if he could claim them, he could restore himself to full divinity, and perhaps even increase his power beyond what he had previously possessed. His search brought him into conflict with a mortal hero named Cyric, an assassin and murderer who in many ways embodied the principles Bhaal himself represented. The two fought near Boresker Bridge, a location that would become significant in Bhaal's legacy. Cyric wielded Godsbane, a sword of immense power that was, unknown to him at the time, actually an avatar of Mask, the god of thieves and shadows disguised as a weapon. With this blade, Cyric struck down Bhaal, driving it through the god's heart and ending his mortal life. Bhaal's blood flowed into the winding water, the river that passed beneath Boresker Bridge, And in that moment, the Lord of Murder experienced what he had inflicted upon countless millions, violent death at the hands of another. But Bhaal, unlike Bane and Myrkul, had prepared for this possibility. He had foreseen, through divine prophecy or simple paranoid caution, that his time as a god might end, and so he had implemented a contingency plan that was both brilliant and horrifying in its scope. Before the time of troubles, he had impregnated numerous mortal women across Faerûn, fathering children who carried within them a spark of his divine essence. These children, who would become known as the Bhaalspawn, were his insurance policy, his path to resurrection should he fall. The plan was elegantly brutal. The Bhaalspawn would grow to adulthood, each carrying within them a portion of Bhaal's divine power. Then, through a combination of instinct and external manipulation, they would be driven to kill each other. With each death, the victor would absorb the divine essence of the slain, consolidating Bhaal's scattered power. Eventually, one Bhaalspawn would emerge victorious, having absorbed the essence of all the others. And through this vessel Bhaal intended to be resurrected, reconstituted from the scattered fragments of his divinity. It was a plan worthy of the god of murder, using death itself as the mechanism for rebirth. However, as with many such schemes, the outcome would not unfold exactly as the god had intended. It was a plan worthy of the god of murder, using death itself as the mechanism for rebirth. But like many such schemes, it depended on factors beyond Bhaal's control. The Bhaalspawn, despite carrying his essence, were individuals with their own wills and choices. Some embraced their murderous heritage. Others fought against it, seeking to deny the darkness within them. The conflicts between them, which would later be called the Bhaalspawn crisis, spread across Faerûn and lasted for years. But ultimately Bhaal's plan for simple resurrection through consolidation failed. With all three members of the Dead Three destroyed during the time of troubles, their divine portfolios needed to be redistributed. The cosmic balance required that tyranny, murder, death, and the dead remain overseen by divine authority. Into this vacuum stepped Cyric, the mortal assassin who had slain Bhaal. Through a combination of circumstance, ambition, and the possession of multiple artifacts of power, Cyric ascended to godhood in the aftermath of the Avatar crisis. Cyric claimed the portfolios of all three of the Dead Three, becoming the god of murder, strife, death, and the dead all at once. He took the title Lord of Three Crowns, reflecting his absorption of their domains. It was an unprecedented consolidation of power, giving him authority over areas that had been divided among three separate deities. But Cyric lacked the experience, the wisdom, or the temperament to manage such vast responsibility. His reign as a god would be marked by madness and chaos, ultimately leading to the fracturing of the portfolios he had claimed. The time of troubles ended when the tablets of fate were finally recovered and returned to Io. The over-god, satisfied that his lesson had been learned, allowed the surviving gods to return to their divine realms. magic stabilized. The connection between priests and their deities was restored. The cosmic order reasserted itself, but Faerûn would never be quite the same. The deaths of gods had proven that even divine beings were not truly immortal, that hubris and ambition could lead to destruction, no matter how high one climbed. The dead three, who had started as ambitious mortals, ascended to godhood and ruled for centuries, were now truly dead in a sense far more final than their name had originally implied. Their temples fell silent or were converted to the worship of other deities. Their priests either died, abandoned their faith, or transferred their loyalty to Cyric. Their cults fragmented or dissolved entirely. The era of their dominance was over, ended not by rival gods or mortal heroes, but by their own involvement in schemes that reached too far. Yet death, as the dead three themselves had understood better than most, is not always the end. Divine essence, once created, does not simply vanish. It persists, waiting for the right circumstances to manifest again. Bane's essence lingered in his son Exvim. Myrkul's essence remained in the crown of horns and other repositories. Bhaal's essence was scattered among his many children. They were dead, truly dead, but the potential for return remained, sleeping and waiting for the moment when death itself would prove temporary, even for gods who had died permanently. The mortal world moved on, adapting to the absence of the dead three as it adapted to all changes. New gods rose to claim portions of their portfolios. Kelimver eventually claimed the domain of the dead from Cyric, becoming a god of death far more just and fair than Myrkul had ever been. But the legacy of the dead three persisted in the structures they had built, the organizations they had founded, and the darkness they had spread across Faerûn during their reign. They had touched too many lives, influenced too many events, to simply fade from history and memory. Section 5. Schemes of Return and Resurrection. Death, as the dead three had known better than most during their reign as gods, is not always permanent, even for deities who had been destroyed during the time of troubles, whose physical forms had been shattered, and whose consciousnesses had been scattered across the plains. The possibility of return existed. Divine essence, once created, does not simply vanish into nothingness. It lingers, waiting for the right circumstances, the right vessel, the right moment to coalesce once more into something resembling its original form. The years following the Avatar crisis would prove that even the most complete destruction could be reversed, given enough time, enough planning, and enough ambition. Bane's return came first among the dead three, and it came through a mechanism he had prepared long before the time of troubles. Iatu Exvim, the son of Bane, had been born from a union between the god of tyranny and a powerful demon. The child inherited aspects of both parents, combining divine essence with demonic power in a being that was neither fully one nor the other. Exvim had grown to adulthood during Bane's reign, serving his father's interests and learning the arts of tyranny and domination that defined the Black Hand's worship. When Bane died during the time of troubles, Exvim absorbed a portion of his father's divine essence, becoming a lesser deity in his own right. He claimed the title of God of Tyranny, though his power was vastly diminished compared to what Bane had wielded at his height. Exvim was cruel and ambitious, but he lacked his father's cunning and strategic brilliance. He was, in many ways, a pale shadow of the god who had preceded him. His worship grew among those who had followed Bane, but it never reached the same heights. The faithful knew, on some level, that Exvim was not truly Bane, merely a placeholder holding divine power that rightfully belonged to another. What the faithful did not know, what even Exvim himself may not have fully understood, was that Bane's consciousness had not been completely destroyed. A fragment of the god of tyranny's essence remained coherent, hidden within Exvim's divine spark, sleeping and waiting for the moment to assert itself. It was a parasitic relationship, though Exvim did not realize he was the host rather than the inheritor. Bane's consciousness slowly grew stronger over the decades, feeding on the worship directed toward Exvim, rebuilding itself from the scattered fragments of its former power. The resurrection came in the year 1372 Dale Reckoning, 14 years after the time of troubles had ended. The location was Gentle Keep, the same city where Bane had maintained his greatest stronghold during his mortal avatar's final days. His most devoted followers, those who had never truly accepted Exvim as a replacement for their dark lord, conducted a ritual of immense complexity and power. The exact details of the ritual remain known only to the highest priests of Bane's faith, preserved in secret texts that outsiders have never seen. What we know with certainty is that the ritual succeeded beyond what most thought possible. Exvim's body split open, tearing apart from within as Bane's consciousness asserted itself and reclaimed the divine power that had been distributed between them. The lesser god was destroyed, consumed entirely by his own father, in an act of cosmic patricide that would have delighted the old Bane. From Exvim's shattered form emerged Bane himself, reborn and restored to divinity. He was diminished compared to his previous incarnation, his power reduced by the long years of dormancy and the trauma of death and resurrection. But he was unmistakably the same entity that had died at Torm's hands decades earlier. The return of Bane sent shockwaves through the divine hierarchy. Gods who had assumed his permanent death now had to contend with his renewed presence. Cyric, who had claimed Bane's portfolio of tyranny and strife after the time of troubles, found a significant portion of that power torn away, as Bane reclaimed what he considered rightfully his. The Black Hand's faithful, who had maintained their devotion through the long years under Exvim's lesser rule, welcomed their true lord's return with celebrations that mixed religious ecstasy with demonstrations of the tyranny they had always embraced. Bane's restored presence marked a shift in the balance of power among the evil deities. He was no longer the god who had stood alongside Bhaal and Myrkul as equals, no longer possessed of the full might he had wielded before the time of troubles. But he was back, and his ambition had not diminished one iota. If anything, the experience of death and resurrection had made him more determined, more ruthless, more willing to pursue power without restraint. He had died once. He had no intention of allowing it to happen again. Bhaal's path to potential resurrection was far more complex and far-reaching than Bane's relatively straightforward return through his son. The Lord of Murder had prepared for the possibility of his death with characteristic thoroughness, implementing a plan that spanned the entirety of Faerûn and involved hundreds of mortal lives. Before the time of troubles, Bhaal had fathered numerous children with mortal women across the realms. These women came from all walks of life, all races, all social classes. Some knew they had lain with a god. Others believed their child's father was simply a mortal man. But all of them bore children who carried within them a spark of Bhaal's divine essence. These children, the Bhaal spawn, grew to adulthood largely unaware of their true heritage. They were scattered across Faerûn, living ordinary lives, pursuing ordinary goals. But within each of them slept a portion of their father's power, a fragment of the god of murder's essence waiting to awaken. As they matured, many began to experience urges toward violence, dreams of blood and killing, inexplicable abilities that set them apart from normal mortals. Some embraced these dark gifts, becoming killers and tyrants in their own right. Others fought against them, seeking to deny the murderous legacy encoded in their very souls. The plan Bhaal had implemented was elegantly brutal in its simplicity. The Bhaal spawn would be driven by instinct and external manipulation to seek each other out and fight to the death. With each victory, the survivor would absorb the divine essence of the slain, consolidating Bhaal's scattered power. Eventually, one Bhaal spawn would emerge victorious, having absorbed the essence of all the others, and in that being Bhaal would be resurrected. It was murder on a scale worthy of the god of murder himself, using his own children as pawns in a cosmic game that would end with his rebirth. The conflict between the Bhaal spawn became known as the Bhaal spawn crisis, and it dominated portions of Faerûn for years. The children of Bhaal waged war against each other, sometimes openly, and sometimes through assassination and subterfuge. Some formed alliances, seeking safety in numbers. Others embraced isolation, trusting no one. Cities were caught in the crossfire as Bhaal spawn and their followers clashed. Innocents died by the thousands as collateral damage in a war they barely understood. The most famous of the Bhaal spawn was a child raised in Candlekeep, one of Faerûn's greatest libraries, who would eventually travel across the Sword Coast and Am, confronting other children of Bhaal and navigating the complex politics of their shared heritage. This individual's story would become legendary, chronicled in histories both mundane and divine, a tale of choice and destiny, of nature versus nurture, of whether one's heritage determined one's fate. The most famous of the Bhaal spawn was a child raised in Candlekeep, one of Faerûn's greatest libraries, who would eventually travel across the Sword Coast and Am, confronting other children of Bhaal and navigating the complex politics of their shared heritage. This individual's journey became the subject of numerous historical accounts, though the exact details vary between sources. What historical records suggest is that this particular Bhaal spawn absorbed significant divine essence from other children of murder, becoming a focal point for Bhaal's resurrection plan. However, the outcome did not unfold as Bhaal had originally intended. Rather than serving as a simple vessel for the god's return, this individual appears to have resisted or redirected Bhaal's essence in ways the god had not anticipated. The exact nature of what transpired remains somewhat unclear in surviving records, with different theological texts offering varying interpretations of events. Bhaal's essence was denied the resurrection it had been crafted to achieve. The god remained dead, his consciousness unable to fully reconstitute itself without a willing or conquered host. His divine power was scattered among his surviving children, a legacy of murder distributed across multiple beings, rather than consolidated in a single resurrected deity. It seemed that the Lord of Murder would remain permanently dead, his ambitions thwarted by the free will of the very children he had created as his path to immortality. But divine essence, as has been noted, does not simply vanish. Bhaal's power continued to exist in various forms across Faerûn, dormant but not destroyed. The Bhaal spawns served as repositories of his divine spark, and while his original plan for a straightforward resurrection did not succeed as designed, the essence remained viable. In the year 1482 Dale Reckoning, following the Second Sundering and the restoration of many aspects of the world that had been altered during the Spell Plague and its aftermath, Bhaal returned. Historical accounts suggest that the last of the original Bhaal spawn essentially served as backup storage for his divine essence. And when sufficient power had accumulated, Bhaal was able to reconstitute himself. He emerged diminished, a quasi-deity rather than a full god, with power far reduced from his original state. This weakened Bhaal was bitter, filled with rage at the centuries he had spent dead, while his fellow member of the Dead Three had returned to power. He immediately began scheming to restore himself to full divinity, to reclaim the power he had once wielded. His faithful, those who had maintained their worship even during his long absence, welcomed him back and pledged themselves to his resurrection. The Lord of Murder had returned, and once again, the threat of his influence hung over Faerûn. Myrkul's fate differed from both Bane and Bhaal in significant ways. Where Bane had prepared an heir, and Bhaal had scattered his essence among children, Myrkul had invested portions of his divine power in artifacts and places of power. The crown of horns, which had played a role in his confrontation with Midnight during the time of troubles, remained as a repository of his essence. Other items and locations across Faerûn-held fragments of the Lord of Bone's power, waiting to be discovered or claimed. For many years, Myrkul existed in a state between life and death, neither fully destroyed nor truly alive. His consciousness was fragmented, scattered across multiple vessels and locations. Occasionally, his influence would manifest, usually in places strongly associated with death or undeath. Necromancers who sought his favor sometimes received visions or minor blessings, fragments of divine power leaking through from wherever Myrkul's shattered consciousness dwelt. The crown of horns passed through multiple hands over the centuries, each bearer experiencing some degree of influence from the fragment of Myrkul's essence contained within. Some went mad from the contact. Others gained necromantic powers far beyond what they should have possessed. All felt the presence of something vast and terrible, a consciousness that had once been a god and desperately sought to become one again. Like Bhaal, Myrkul's return came after the Second Sundering. In the year 1482 Dale Reckoning, he emerged as a quasi-deity, a being with divine power, but far less than he had commanded before the time of troubles. His realm of the dead had long since been claimed by other deities, first Cyric, and then Kelimver, leaving him without the vast domain he had once overseen. He was the Lord of Bones in name only, a shadow of his former self, struggling to rebuild what had been lost. The three members of the Dead Three, all returned, but all diminished, found themselves in a position both familiar and strange. They were gods again, or at least quasi-deities, with fragments of divine power. They could grant spells to their faithful, influence events on a scale beyond mortal capacity, and existed outside the normal constraints of mortal life. But they were not what they had been. The time of troubles had taken something from them that could never be fully recovered. They were the Dead Three in truth now, gods who had died and returned, forever marked by that experience. Their worshippers struggled with theological questions raised by the deaths and resurrections of their deities. If the gods could die, what did that mean for the faithful who had devoted their lives to worshiping them? If divine power could be lost and regained, diminished and restored, were the gods truly eternal? The priests of the Dead Three developed complex dogmas to explain their deities' fates, spinning narratives that transformed catastrophic failure into divine mystery. Some claimed that the deaths during the time of troubles had been intentional, a sacrifice made by the gods to teach mortals important lessons. Others argued that death and resurrection were simply another form of power, that the Dead Three had transcended even the normal limits of divinity by experiencing mortality and returning from it. Still others took a darker view, acknowledging that the gods had failed, had died, and had only returned through luck and preparation, rather than any inherent divine invincibility. The theological debates surrounding the Dead Three's resurrections continue to this day among scholars of the divine. What we can verify through historical records is that all three had implemented some form of contingency before their deaths. Whether through offspring, artifacts, or other vessels, the mechanisms differed, but the underlying principle remained consistent. Divine essence, once created, could be preserved and eventually reconstituted given the right circumstances. The truth, known to those who studied history carefully, was that the dead three had been caught up in schemes beyond their control, had died as a consequence of their own ambition and the ambitions of others, and had returned only because they had prepared contingencies, and because cosmic circumstances had shifted in ways that allowed their essences to reconstitute. There was no grand design, no divine plan. Just ambitious beings who refused to accept permanent death, who had crafted backup plans and invested their power in ways that would allow for eventual resurrection. This truth was both humbling and terrifying. It suggested that divinity itself was not the ultimate state of existence, that even gods were subject to forces beyond their control, but it also demonstrated that determination and planning could overcome even death itself, that beings who refused to accept their destruction could find ways to return no matter how completely they had been annihilated. The dead three were diminished, certainly, but they were back. And they were as dangerous now as they had ever been, perhaps more so, because they had tasted death and learned from it. Section 6: Modern Machinations and Enduring Legacy. The dead three entered the modern era of Faerûn, specifically the year 1492 Dale Reckoning, as beings fundamentally changed by their experiences. They were no longer the confident gods who had ruled their domains for centuries before the time of troubles. They existed in a diminished state, as quasi-deities with power that eclipsed mortal capabilities, but fell far short of true godhood. Based on what we know of their mortal personalities and divine ambitions, we can reasonably infer that this diminished state was intolerable to them. Everything they had done, every sacrifice they had made, every line they had crossed in their pursuit of power had been in service of transcending limitation. This diminished state was intolerable to them. Everything they had done, every sacrifice they had made, every line they had crossed in their pursuit of power, all of it had been in service of transcending limitation, to be reduced once more to a lesser state, to feel the constraints of quasi-divinity when they had once commanded true divine authority, was a torture more profound than any physical punishment could have been. They needed to restore themselves to full godhood, to reclaim what had been taken from them. And they were willing to do absolutely anything to achieve that goal. The three found themselves drawn together once more by necessity and shared purpose. Their relationship had always been complex, mixing alliance with rivalry, cooperation with competition. But their current circumstances demanded collaboration. Individually, as quasi-deities, they could accomplish much, but not enough. Together, pooling their resources and coordinating their efforts, they might find a path back to true divinity. And so, the dead three reformed their ancient alliance, not as equals standing at the height of their power, but as diminished beings desperately seeking restoration. Their scheme centered on an artifact of immense power, the crown of Karsus. This ancient relic dated back to the days of Netheril, the greatest magical empire in Faerûn's history, when archwizards commanded power that made even modern archmages seem like children playing with cantrips. Karsus himself had been the most powerful of Netheril's archwizards, a being who had attempted to seize the power of a goddess and had destroyed his entire civilization in the process. The crown that bore his name contained a fraction of that terrible power, the ability to dominate and control entities far beyond normal mortal or even divine capacity. The Dead Three learned of an entity called the Netherbrain, a massive and ancient mind flayer elder brain of extraordinary power. Mind flayers, also known as illithids, were horrifying creatures that fed on the brains of intelligent beings and possessed powerful psionic abilities. An elder brain was the accumulated consciousness of countless mind flayers, a being of vast psychic power that commanded entire colonies. But another brain was something far more terrible, an elder brain that had achieved a size and power far beyond the norm, potentially capable of dominating entire regions with its psychic might. The plan the Dead Three devised was both brilliant and audacious. They would use the crown of Karsus to dominate the Netherbrain, bending its immense psychic power to their will. Through the Netherbrain, they would control an army of mind flayers and those infected with mind flayer tadpoles, creating a force that could sweep across Faerûn and bring entire nations under their control. The worship they would gain from this conquered territory, combined with the successful completion of such an ambitious scheme, might be enough to restore them to true godhood. To implement this plan, each of the Dead Three chose a mortal champion, a chosen one who would carry out their will on the material plane. These chosen were not simply powerful mortals granted divine favor. Each was fundamentally transformed by their deity's essence, becoming something more than mortal, but less than divine. Avatars of their respective gods' will and ambition, they were granted netherstones, fragments of the crown of Karsus that would allow them to command the Netherbrain and coordinate their efforts. Bane chose Enver Gortash, a man whose rise to power embodied everything the god of tyranny represented. Gortash had started as a street urchin, sold into slavery as a child, and had clawed his way to prominence through cunning, ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to remain beneath anyone. He became an arms dealer, a political manipulator, and eventually one of the most powerful figures in Baldur's Gate, the great city that would become the focal point of the Dead Three's schemes. Gortash understood tyranny intimately, both from being subjected to it and from inflicting it on others. He was the perfect instrument for Bane's will. Myrkul chose Cathuric Thorm, a man whose relationship with death was complex and deeply personal. Thorm had once been a follower of Selûne, the moon goddess, but had turned to darkness after the death of his daughter. His grief and rage led him to Shar, goddess of darkness and loss, and eventually to Myrkul himself. Thorm's obsession with defeating death, with bringing back those who had been lost, made him ideal for the Lord of Bones. Myrkul granted him a form of immortality, an inability to die that was both gift and curse, transforming him into an avatar of death's inevitability. Bhaal's choice was more complicated, reflecting the god of murder's peculiar relationship with his own offspring. He selected Orin the Red, a member of a family of Bhaal worshippers who had served the Lord of Murder for generations. But Orin was not simply chosen for her devotion. She was a Bhaal spawn, one of the children who carried Bhaal's divine essence within her blood. Her entire existence was dedicated to murder as worship, to killing as a sacrament. She was an artist of assassination, viewing each death as a work of art crafted for her father's pleasure. The three chosen worked together to implement their god's plan, though like the dead three themselves, their alliance was marked by tension and mistrust. They infiltrated the Mind Flayer colony, gained access to the Netherbrain, and used the crown of Karsus to dominate it. Through the Netherbrain's power, they created what became known as the Cult of the Absolute, a false religion that promised salvation and power to its followers, while secretly transforming them into thralls controlled by the Elder Brain. The cult spread rapidly across the Sword Coast region. People desperate for meaning, for power, for belonging, flocked to join what they believed was a new religious movement. They were implanted with Mind Flayer tadpoles, parasites that would eventually transform them into illithids, but which initially granted them strange powers and connected them to the Absolute's psychic network. The cult promised that the Absolute, a mysterious divine entity, would grant its faithful the power to transcend their limitations and achieve greatness. In reality, they were becoming slaves to the Netherbrain, pawns in the Dead Three's scheme to conquer Faerûn. Baldur's Gate, one of Faerûn's greatest cities, became the primary target of this conspiracy. The city was wealthy, influential, and strategically positioned. If the Dead Three could control Baldur's Gate, they could use it as a base to expand their dominion across the entire Sword Coast and eventually beyond. Gortash maneuvered himself into a position of political power in the city, becoming one of its leaders, while secretly advancing the cult's agenda. Meanwhile, Orin conducted ritual murders, feeding Bhaal's power with carefully orchestrated killings. Thorm commanded forces from Moonrise Towers, a stronghold that served as a staging ground for the cult's military operations. The scheme was vast in scope and had progressed far toward success when it was disrupted by events beyond the Dead Three's control. Adventurers, as so often happens in Faerûn's history, became involved in events far larger than themselves. Individuals who had been infected with the Mind Flayer tadpoles, but had somehow resisted their influence, began investigating the cult and uncovering the truth behind the Absolute. Their journey took them across the region, from the shadows of Baldur's gate to the cursed lands around Moonrise Towers, gradually piecing together the conspiracy. The revelation that the Absolute was not a god, but a dominated netherbrain, and that behind this scheme stood the Dead Three, shook the foundations of the cult. Historical records from 1492 Dale Reckoning indicate that each of the Dead Three's chosen was confronted. Cathuric Thorm fell at Moonrise Towers, his connection to Myrkul severed and his immortality finally broken. And Gortash's fate came at a critical moment in the conspiracy's unfolding. Orin the Red, the most devoted of the three chosen, met her end within the temple of Bhaal itself, with the god personally manifesting to witness the confrontation. The accounts of what transpired after suggest that the conspiracy to use the Netherbrain for mass domination was ultimately thwarted, though the exact sequence of events and the fates of all involved vary somewhat between different historical sources. What we know with certainty is that the Dead Three's grand scheme to restore themselves to full godhood through this plot failed. The three remained as quasi-deities, their attempt having been dismantled by mortal intervention. Once again, yet failure has never deterred the Dead Three. They continue to plot and scheme from their weakened state, seeking new paths to power, new opportunities to reclaim what they have lost. Their cults remain active, their faithful still worship them, and their influence continues to touch events across Faerûn. They are diminished but not destroyed, weakened but not defeated. As long as tyranny exists in the world, Bane will draw power from it. As long as murder occurs, Bhaal will feel each death and grow stronger. As long as mortals fear death and seek to understand it, Myrkul will find worshippers drawn to his mysteries. It bears noting that our understanding of these recent events comes from multiple sources, and as with any history still being written, some details remain subject to interpretation. What scholars agree upon is that the Dead Three attempted a major conspiracy involving ancient Netherese magic and illithid powers, and that this conspiracy was ultimately defeated through mortal intervention. The story of the Dead Three is a cautionary tale that echoes across the centuries of Faerûn's history. It speaks to the dangers of unchecked ambition, of pursuing power without restraint or moral consideration. Three mortals who refused to accept their limitations achieved godhood through cunning and ruthlessness, only to lose that divinity through schemes that reached too far. They returned from death itself, demonstrating a persistence that borders on the incomprehensible. Yet they remain trapped in a diminished state, forever reaching for a restoration that may never come. Their legacy extends far beyond their own fates. The organizations they founded, the Gentarim serving Bane's interests in spreading tyranny, the assassins' guilds that worship Bhaal, the necromancers who study Myrkul's mysteries, all continue to exist and exert influence across the realms. The philosophies they promoted, that strength justifies itself, that murder can be holy, that death is merely a transformation to be studied and mastered. These ideas persist in the dark corners of civilization. The Dead Three shaped Faerûn in fundamental ways, and those shapes remain visible centuries after their initial fall. For those who study the Dead Three's history, the question inevitably arises about what lessons can be drawn from their rise and fall. Some see them as proof that ambition must be tempered with wisdom, that the pursuit of power without restraint leads inevitably to destruction. Others see them as evidence that even the most complete failure can be overcome with sufficient determination and planning. Still, others view them as a warning about the nature of divinity itself, as proof that even gods are not immune to the consequences of their choices. The truth likely encompasses all these interpretations and more. The Dead Three are complex figures whose story resists simple moral lessons. They were mortals who achieved the seemingly impossible by refusing to accept limitations. They were gods who fell because they involved themselves in schemes beyond their understanding or control. They are quasi-deities who persist despite repeated defeats because they will not accept their diminished state. They are, above all else, a testament to the enduring nature of ambition and the question of whether any price is worth paying for power. As you rest and reflect on this tale, consider the Dead Three's journey from ambitious mortals to gods, to fallen deities, to their current quasi-divine state. Consider the choices they made, the lines they crossed, the prices they paid, and continue to pay for their pursuit of power. Their story is woven into the fabric of Faerûn's history, influencing events and lives across multiple centuries. They are the Dead Three, gods who died and returned, forever marked by their experiences, forever reaching for the restoration of what they lost. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the secrets and sorrows of the Dead Three. If you found this exploration of their dark history enlightening, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the lore of Dungeons and Dragons and the Forgotten Realms. The stories of Faerûn are vast and interconnected, and there are countless more tales waiting to be told. Until next time, rest well, and may your dreams be filled with the rich lore of these incredible worlds.